Good morning. Welcome to Tel Aviv University and to the annual strategic workshop of the Irwin Cotler Institute for Democracy, Human Rights and Justice. Buenos días, bienvenidos a la Universidad de Tel Aviv y al taller estratégico anual del Instituto Irwin Cotler para la democracia, los derechos humanos y la justicia. Boker Tov, ברוכים הבאים לאוניברסיטת תל אביב ולסדנה אסטרטגית השנתית של מכון אירווין קוטלר לדמוקרטיה, לזכויות אדם ולצדק. My name is Antonio Peña. I am from Colombia, a lawyer, an Irwin Cotler Fellow for the period 2024-2025, and a student in the Master's degree of Security and Diplomacy at Tel Aviv University. It is a privilege to stand today alongside so many inspiring colleagues and distinguished guests, especially at a time when the principles of democracy, human rights, and justice are being tested in our region and around the world. Dear President of Tel Aviv University, Ariel Porat, dear former Justice Minister of Canada, Professor Irwin Cotler, and former Head of Friends of Tel Aviv University Association Canada, Ms. Ariela Cotler, dear Professor Uriah Shavit, Head of the Cotler Institute, and Dr. Carl Jonker, Academic Director of the Institute. Your Excellencies, Ambassadors, Yuria Jaroshevich from Belarus, Ms. Maria Cristina Ceballos from Ecuador, Ms. Nina Nordstrom from Finland, Ms. Maya Solomon from Greece, Mr. Luca Ferrari from Italy, Mr. Mauricio Scanero from Mexico, Mr. Dan Prasad Pandit from Nepal, Mr. Isra Kohin from Panama, Ms. Eileen Mendiola from Philippines, Ms. Alexandra Reitmark from Sweden, Mr. Jakongir Aminov from Uzbekistan, and distinguished members of the diplomatic corps from the following countries: Brazil, Canada, Ecuador, Egypt, El Salvador, Ethiopia, Hungary, India, Kenya, Kosovo, North Macedonia, Poland, Philippines, Singapore, Slovenia, South Korea, Spain, and the United Kingdom. Esteemed guests, my dear friends, distinguished Irwin Cotler Fellows, it is my great honor to open this year's strategic workshop. In times of complexity and uncertainty, we need thoughtful analysis and courageous ideas. On behalf of all of us, I hope today's discussions will reflect both. I now call the President of Tel Aviv University, Professor Ariel Porat, to offer his greetings.
Dear friends, Irwin Cotler, Ariela Cotler, Uriah Shavit, head of the Institute, and of course you, dear guests, representatives of so many countries around the globe, especially in these days when Israel is quite isolated, at least because of the situation that we are in. It's especially encouraging to see people representing countries coming and participating with us in what is a very important event for the Institute, for the Irwin Cotler Institute, which is the strategic workshop. And it's about Israel, and it's about the political situation, and about many other issues which are so important for all of us. The Cotler Institute has been established by Ariela and friends of Tel Aviv University. After Irwin Cotler, I believe that I don't need to present Irwin Cotler to you. He is a legendary figure not only for the Jewish people around the world, I think much more than that. It's a great honor to have an institute here at Tel Aviv University named after him. I also want to say a few good words about Uriah Shavit, who leads this institute with inspiration and enthusiasm, and we are all very proud of what he has done from the time that institute has been established. Now, the institute is focused on democracy, combating anti-Semitism, combating racism more generally, about human rights. And these values are so important for any country, including Israel. Sometimes there might be a conflict between some of those values. And I want to say just a few words about such a conflict that we see at the moment, I believe, in the United States, but also in Israel. And this is the conflict which actually touches upon us, academia. The Israeli academia, I believe also the American academia. And why there is a kind of a conflict here? If you look at what's going on now in the United States, you see the American administration, the Trump administration, that makes a lot of efforts to combat anti-Semitism. And for us, there is nothing more important than combating anti-Semitism, and there is a good reason to do so, especially after what we had seen following October 7, that in numerous American campuses there were anti-Semitic and also anti-Israeli, but for our purposes, anti-Semitism has been provoked by sometimes by pro-Palestinian organizations and others. And in some of the cases, the American universities failed to combat anti-Semitism adequately and effectively. So in this regard, I think that it was right that the American administration took it very seriously and tried to take steps to prevent it and sometimes even to punish those who were responsible for that. At the same time, I think that the American administration went too far. And what we have heard in recent month or so, that the administration have made some steps to literally to enter into some of the American campuses, trying to dictate contents, to have control on appointments, and to threaten American universities by sanctioning them financially if they do not comply with the new orders of the administration. So these steps, even though the excuse for that is combating anti-Semitism, and as I said, there are not many values who are so important as combating anti-Semitism, but it seems that sometimes it is more an excuse in order to infringe upon academic freedom, to infringe upon the independency of universities. And I believe that once we talk about democracy, and democracy is one of the values, and that is also enhanced by this institute, I think that this line, sometimes very delicate line, between what are the legitimate steps to combat anti-Semitism and at what point it becomes intruding other freedoms, academic freedom, the independence of your university and so on, this line is very delicate and should be, we should be very careful as to how to draw this line. In Israel, we have a similar problem. I'll give you a very brief example. There is on the Knesset table a law which has not been enacted yet but might be enacted, which is focused on deterring incitements against terrorism. Now, incitement for terrorism, like people who incites for terrorism. Now, no question, exactly with anti-Semitism, there is no question also about inciting for terrorism, this is something bad that should be deterred and should be punished. No question about that. Everybody agree. But the main thing was that the new law is enacted. If it is enacted, it applies only to universities. Only to universities. In fact, there is a general law in Israel which says that if you incite for terror, you should go to jail, and that's fine. But now there is a new law on the Knesset table. Still, it's a bill. If enacted, it would impose upon university leaders an obligation to dismiss a professor who incites for terror, even though there is a general law about that. So there is a specific law saying that university leaders should dismiss a professor who incites for terror. Now, this is a good goal. Of course, if there is a professor here at the university who incites to terror, I don't want him to be here. No question about that. But it's important to emphasize that until the establishment of the State of Israel, it didn't happen even once in any university in Israel that there was a professor who incited for terror, even not once. And then you ask yourself, so why they do it? Why they focus on universities for a problem that does not exist? When you read the law, you understand that, first of all, you have to dismiss that person who is suspected of inciting for terror without trial. It's an administrative act, which is by itself very problematic. You know, in Israel, as in any democratic country, even a terrorist, a rapist, or a murderer goes to jail only after he sees a judge. But here, it should be an administrative act, and the main thing is that the definition of what does it mean, incitement for terror, is actually done by the Minister of Education. So it is not a kind of a legal definition that you should go to a judge to define whether a specific case there is an incitement for terror, but instead, it is an administrative decision imposed upon universities, so the government could tell us, that person who said something which we don't like, this is incitement for terror. If you don't dismiss him, your budget would be cut. That's a sanction under that law that the government could apply to universities. So this is a little bit long story that I told you about, but as you could see the parallels. On the one hand, in the United States, combating anti-Semitism is a very good reason to do many things. At the same time, it's a very incitement for terror. It's a terrible thing, and it makes a lot of sense to combat incitements for terror. But at the same time, one should be very cautious not to go too far to infringe upon freedom of expression, upon academic freedom, upon independence of universities, because at the end of the day, you know, even if you look to that specific case in the United States, when the American presidents intrude into American universities with an excuse of protecting the Jews, there is a risk that at the end of the day, it would encourage anti-Semitism. It would encourage anti-Semitism, because at the end of the day, people would say, what happened to the American academia happened because of the Jews. And this is something we don't want to happen. So, to summarize, we should be very careful when we sometimes have to balance between different values. You want to do something good, be careful not to do at the same time also something bad. So I'm very much looking forward to this very interesting event, this strategic workshop, and thank you very much for attending. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Porat, for your important words and your leadership at Tel Aviv University. Now, it's my honor to invite Professor Irwin Cotler, former Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, to deliver his remarks.
Boker Tov, good morning, welcome, bienvenue, bruchim abim, lekulam, excellencies, chers amis, friends. I'm delighted to be here, and I just want to express appreciation to President Porat for his important opening remarks and message, which freed me from trying to say in a less effective way the same message that he shared with you this morning. We meet at an important historical inflection moment, even a set of historical inflection moments. We meet in the immediate aftermath of the 80th anniversary of VE Day, Victory in Europe, ending the Second World War. It so happened that it took place on my birthday, which is May the 8th, and I turned 5 years old on VE Day. I remember it like it was yesterday, because as my parents of blessed memory told me at the time, this will be your most important birthday. And it was indeed a celebratory moment, a national celebration in Canada as it was in Europe and elsewhere. But as I grew up, I learned what happened between 1940 and 1945. I learned, in a word, as found expression in another 80th anniversary of the liberation of the death camp Auschwitz-Birkenau. I learned about Auschwitz-Birkenau, message and metaphor of the Holocaust, where 1.3 million people were deported to the death camp Auschwitz. 1.1 million of them were Jews. Let there be no mistake about it. Jews were murdered at Auschwitz because of anti-Semitism. But anti-Semitism did not itself die at Auschwitz, and it remains the bloodied canary in the mineshaft of global evil today. And I want to commend the Institute under the leadership of Professor Uriah Shavit and Dr. Karl Jonker for yet again another annual global report on anti-Semitism, let alone their work in combating a phenomenon that is not just threatening to Jews, but threatening to democracy. We should not forget in that regard what happened between 1933 and 1940 as well, where the infamous death camp Auschwitz was built in 1933, when Germany was a democracy, similarly to the Nuremberg race laws being adopted in a democracy. And so anti-Semitism is not just threatening to Jews, it's toxic to democracy. The second inflection moment that we are meeting in is where we are witnessing, experiencing a resurgent, intensifying, concerted axis of authoritarianism, or I would call axis of evil, as between Russia, China, and Iran, where Khamenei's Iran has its footprints all over the 7 fronts that Israel is confronting in war today. And this takes place at the same time that we're witnessing a backsliding of democracies, of a polarization within and between democracies. And with the advent of US President Trump, where the US had been the linchpin of the transatlantic alliance, of what we call the rules-based international order. And what we've been witnessing has been an upending of both. And as we meet today, President Trump embarks on his Mideast trip today, at the same time that negotiations are being conducted with respect to a hopeful, effective, and permanent dismantling of Iran's nuclear threat. Second, negotiations with respect to Russia, Ukraine, a 30-day humanitarian ceasefire against the backdrop of a hopeful peace agreement, and a meeting also today with China on the whole issue of tariffs and trade. So we're coming together today really at a very important historical inflection moment, and what President Porat described as the US administration's approach to combating anti-Semitism, parallel with the followed for due process. We're seeing some of that in the law before the Knesset today, and the fallout of American political leadership as it resonates internationally. I just want to mention parenthetically that in Canada, before President Trump was elected president, the Conservative Party was 25 points ahead of the Liberals for the impending election. After President Trump was elected, and US-Canada relations became the forefront of issues facing Canadian voters, and the threat of tariffs et al. From the US, it changed dramatically. And the Liberal candidate then got elected because the main issue that emerged in the Canadian election, which was not present at all 4 months before, when the Conservatives were on their way to a historic majority victory, the main issue that emerged was US-Canada relations, Canadian concern of US not only trade and tariffs, but threats of annexation, and therefore that became the main issue, and the liberal candidate, Mr. Carney, Mark Carney, was deemed to be the more effective person on the main issue of US-Canada relations, which had not been there before, which dovetails also with President Porat's remarks on the fallout that is taking place here with regard to Israel as well. And finally, in terms of historical reflection moments and a painful one, I'm speaking about meeting and here in Israel in the shadow and continuing pain and trauma of the unspeakable mass atrocities of October 7th. Where Israel still lives in October 7th, the rest of the international community lives in October, post-October 8th, which we have been witnessing not only the expressions of denial even that October 7th took place, but even worse than that, support for it, justification of it, even glorification and celebration of the mass atrocities of October 7th in the public squares and in the university campuses of North America, including my own alma mater of McGill University. So we meet at this point where the question of the release of the remaining hostages in Hamas captivity, we have to remember that every day that these hostages are in torturous Hamas captivity is an ongoing crime against humanity. And where the immediate and unconditional release of hostages is not only a foundational norm of international humanitarian law, but in this case here with respect to the hostages is a moral, humanitarian, legal, international obligation of the first order, and from the point of view of the State of Israel is also a Jewish imperative, where Pidyon Shvuim, the liberation of the hostages, is an overriding imperative of the social contract between the government and its people. So all this is a backdrop to the first security workshop, and each of these inflection moments that I mentioned has fallout for the agenda today of this security workshop. And I look forward, together with the graduate fellows of the Cotler Institute, and I want to express in closing my appreciation to my wife Ariella, because she is the reason that this institute was founded. Much of the organization and founding of it was done in my lack of knowledge and surprise, but she made it happen. The graduate fellows are the flagship of the university, and I welcome you here and all of you and look forward to an engaging encounter today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Cotler, for your inspiring message and your continued commitment to human rights and democratic values. Now, I am pleased to invite Professor Uriah Shavit, head of the Irwin Cotler Institute, to share his introductory remarks.
So, good morning to all. First, dear Antonio, I want to congratulate you. I know you put months of effort into bringing this impressive initiative into existence with the guidance of Dr. Karl Juncker, our academic director, and with the help of your marvelous Irwin Cotler Fellows for 2025. So, well done, Antonio. I think he deserves a praise. And dear Irwin, you know, all these years I've known you as a prominent Canadian public figure and a prominent Jewish Zionist advocate. I never thought the day would come where you will be speaking on behalf of two nations whose right to self-determination is being challenged. And yet so it happened. Crazy times and crazy world. That's why we need a strategic workshop to make sense of it all. I have to also mention something quite remarkable happened at this university last week. President Poat, I think, was too shy to mention it, but the university received its highest donation in history, $125 million, is it, give or take? Which I think indicates going to the medical school, by the way. But biomed, but which I think indicates that there is, after all, something very healthy about our society. Because from my knowledge of rich people, they don't give $125 million for projects that they doubt. So that's a very encouraging sign for us, not just as members of this campus, but I think also as Israelis. I think that deserves a round of applause as well. Yes. Now, just brief administrative notes. Food, lunch, and then refreshments will be served between the sessions right over there. You go out, it will be most likely at 12:15, and you'll have a table with a lot of delicious vegetarian, the best of Israeli cuisine. If you'd like to embellish your office with a certificate of participation, you will have to bear with us until 6:15. But then you'll get it, I promise you. And a final administrative note is that obviously lectures, presentations in a workshop of this kind are brief. But we are here to inform. And as Antonio and his associates managed to bring in representatives of almost 30 embassies, it's important for us that you know that if you want more about any of the things discussed here today, we are here to serve. So I'll say a word about strategy and the role of academia in devising and in understanding strategic affairs. There's a tendency to think of the Yom Kippur War and of October 7 as two exceptional events. But the truth is, in history, surprises are the norm, they're not the exception. And the same Israeli intelligence who failed to predict October 7, the same Israeli intelligence that failed to predict the Yom Kippur War is the one that 3 years after had no idea that peace with Egypt will be signed. And the same Israeli intelligence that failed to predict the first Intifada was the one that failed to predict the fall of the Soviet Union and all the rewards it brought with it to Israel. Meaning that the same Israeli intelligence that failed to predict October 7, that is bad news, is possibly one that at the very time we're speaking is failing to predict something else. In fact, in all likelihood, it fails to predict something else. And what academia can do is to provoke. To provoke. Not in the sense of thinking outside the box, because that means nothing, but in the sense of constantly and repeatedly challenging mainstreams. This is not that easy always, because there is the public mainstream, there is the scholarly mainstream. They're often not the same, and often they're both wrong. And for a scholar to be able to challenge either, but even both, is not an easy task. That is why Ibsen taught us that the strongest man is he who stands most alone. It's often a very lonely task. But this is what we are here for. That's why we have tenures, to provoke, to make you uncomfortable. The biggest strategic issue that we should have been discussing, and we are not discussing today, is environmental. Is the fact that you have so many people fighting over all sorts of lands in which no one will be able to live anyway in 100 years' time. The reason why we're not discussing it is that it is simply not our field of expertise. What we will be discussing today are a series of strategic issues, strategic political and social issues. And let me begin by offering a first provocation. So we start the day with a good provocation. I imagine that many of you, I don't know if all of you here, but I imagine that many of you watched, as I did, as I know Irwin did, with horror, 2 months ago, the scene in the White House, in the Oval Office, with Trump and President Zelensky, the bullying, the disrespect, but more than just the bullying and the disrespect, this sense that the person who was elected as the president of the strongest democracy on earth does not see a difference between the leader of a democratic liberal nation and a fascist, despotic nation or regime, to be more precise, that led an unprovoked aggression and committed horrifying war crimes. Many people felt that the only thing missing in the room was a black umbrella. But it was worse than that historical moment, because the black umbrella was the result of naivety, not of viciousness. And it's not quite the same thing. However, I want to say the following, that it's quite possible that we are missing the broader picture of what that moment in history signified. Because there is a tendency to see Obama's administration, Biden's administration, Trump's 2 administrations, as contesting directions in the story, the great story that is the United States. And in a way they are. But in a broader sense, from a broad historical perspective, what we have been witnessing now for 25 years are different manifestations of American decline and failure to address that decline and turn the tables. When you observe the American story and America at the present time, in a calculated way, not in an emotional one, you see frightening similarities to the Soviet Union of the mid-80s. That is, there is no one from the American embassy here today, that's why I allow myself to. We see the constant changing of the guards between aging and incompetent leaders. We see epidemics, social and health epidemics, and declining life expectancies, the only place in the Western world where we see that. We see a broken judiciary that is not trusted. And we see a broken academia, which almost lost touch with its core commitment to facts and truth. On both sides, by the way, both sides of the aisle. And we see huge national debt, which if this were a private company, it would have gone bankrupt already. In part resulting from a military adventure, or to be more precise, from military adventures, including, just like in the 80s, in Afghanistan. And we see more, and we see more. This is just a partial list. Now, I would not advise anyone to underestimate not what America has done for the world, not its greatness, and not its potential capacity to resurrect and do good again. But I would also urge all of us not to underestimate the facts as they are, because this crisis, which has been going on now for years, does have the potential to become irreparable. In fact, maybe it is already so. Technological and social transformations that, again, are not the doing of one person, one or another person, have made a constitution and a social fabric that have worked so well for decades, such that currently have simply, it seems, no way to address the challenges America is facing. And you might say, well, there is a very basic difference between the United States today and the Soviet Union of the mid-'80s, and there is. You'd say the United States is a democracy. Well, again, let's just look at the facts as Americans see them, not as we see them. 40% of Americans believe that the previous elections were stolen or fraud. They don't believe in American democracy. And those who do not see things that way, they recognize that 4 years ago, a violent insurgency failed in the United States, and that Americans went to the polls this time around with the threat, the naked threat of another violent insurrection, only this time more sophisticated, being launched. I don't know of a single theory in political science that regards any of this as healthy democracy. Now, obviously, this has far-reaching implications for the world, but I think we'll all agree that it has far-reaching implications for Israel and the Jewish people, simply because their reliance and presence in the United States is so vital. Is there a serious discussion about this? Again, not something that is certain, not even something that is probable, but something that is now not entirely improbable. A regression of America from world affairs, and ultimately the potential breakdown of the Union. Is this discussed in Israel, even in terms of, are we ready to embrace millions of new Olim? Is this ever discussed? Are we ready for a world where the United States is not a global leader? That this is an option. No one in the Zionist movement thought in 1917 there would be a day without Britain as a global leader. But there was readiness, there was analysis, and that is why Zionism survived. So I said all of this for two reasons. One, so we start the day with a good provocation to unsettle you all. And the second, we have with us, don't think all of them are here yet, but we have with us, at least registered, members of almost 30 diplomatic missions, including 11 ambassadors. And what I want to say to you is that your countries matter. Your mission here matters, and your presence here with us today matters a great deal and is very much appreciated. So I wish for us all a very interesting day. I will take the liberty of introducing the next speaker, simply because he is a good friend and a great scholar. This is Dr. Ophir Winter from the INSS, and who just published a Hebrew version of his book on discourses of pro and cons peace treaties with Israel in the Arab world. And he will be speaking with us on contemporary, present-day Arab discourses on Israel. Thank you very much, Ophir. The floor is yours.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It's a great honor being here with foreign ministers, ambassadors, diplomatic staff. I will start with a question. How many of you are aware of the fact that Yahya Sinwar, you know, the former Hamas leader, the mastermind behind the October 7, was also a novelist? How many of you? Okay, only few. It was in 2004, while he was still serving a life sentence in Israeli prison. Then he wrote an autobiographical novel titled The Thorn and the Coronation. You can see it here. I guess most of you don't know it. Has anyone read it? Not yet. Okay. It's 300 and something pages in Arabic. However, for those of you who doesn't speak Arabic, it's not a problem. Since October 7, it has been translated to English, to French, to Italian, to Chinese, to Turkish, to Persian, to Kurdish, and maybe other languages as well. But please don't rush to the bookstores now, because I was asked by Professor Shavit a few months ago to read it and to write kind of a book report about it. And I didn't know what to expect, honestly. Looking back, I only wish, following what Uriah said, that our academia and our intelligence agencies had read it earlier. Maybe they would have been less surprised by the October 7. So in the next 20 minutes, I will share key findings in the novel, then discuss Arab discourses on the novel following October 7, alongside wider Arab reflections of the war. So let's dive now into the book. So Sinwar's novel blends autobiography and fiction. It tells the story of a Palestinian refugee family in Gaza. The narrator, his name is Ahmad. He is a science student, and he is gradually drawn into Hamas's ideology under the influence of his cousin, Ibrahim, an activist at the Islamic University in Gaza. And unsurprisingly, the novel reflects Sinwar's radical worldview, the one of Hamas, framing the conflict with Israel as a religious war. When comparing the book with what happened on October 7, it becomes clear that the ideological seeds of the attack were sown not only in Sinwar's strategic planning, but also in his writings 20 years earlier. These seeds include the glorification of martyrdom and jihad against the Jewish state, regardless of the cost to the Palestinians, the aspiration to kill as many Israelis, civilians, and soldiers as possible, encouragement of kidnapping and hostage-taking operations, and the rejection of peace and normalization with Israel, along a deep-rooted hatred toward Jews. I will give you several examples. For Sinwar, of course, Palestinian lives, let alone Israeli lives, are expendable. In fact, the October 7 massacre pales in comparison to the fantasies voiced by the Gaza-based Palestinian heroes of the book. During the 1991 Gulf War, which discussed in the book, these characters expressed hope that Saddam Hussein would fire chemical weapons on Israel to wipe half, and I quote, to wipe out half of Israel's 5 million population at the time. When they learned that the missiles are conventional and not chemical, the narrator says that it was as if ice water had been poured over us. You can see in the photo that we were, let's say, preparing for the worst. So Sinwar, disappointed by the hope of mass killing, he settled for glorifying in his novel smaller scale attacks, including shootings, bombings, and suicide missions carried out during the Oslo years until the Second Intifada. These include the murder of a father and his children. It includes also bombing of buses, restaurants, and nightclubs, including the Hamas attack on the Dolphinarium discotheque in 2001 in Tel Aviv, which killed 21 and injured 123 and 20 other young people who came to dance. This was more than 2 decades before the Nova Music Festival massacre, which caused almost 400 deaths. One of Sinwar's goals on October 7 was undoubtedly to sabotage the nearing historic peace and normalization deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia. His novel dedicates significant space to the ideological divide between Arab states and the PLO that pursuing the path of peace settlement with Israel, and Hamas's rigid insistence on violent jihad and rejection of any permanent political settlement of the conflict. So this rift is tracked back to Egyptian President Anwar Sadat's peace initiative in 1977, which, according to the book, painfully shocked the Palestinian people. Later, the novel criticizes the PLO for its Oslo Accords with Israel. In one debate, a Fatah supporter accuses Hamas of launching attacks merely to claim credit for Israeli territorial withdrawals in the framework of the peace process. The Hamas supporter replies that Palestinians should not rely on political agreements, but force Israel's retreat only through armed struggle, keeping alive the goal of liberating all of Palestine when the time is right. Anti-Semitism was mentioned before, so a repeated anti-Semitic motive in the novel is the portrayal of Jews as eternal enemies of Muslims and Islam, linking the Prophet Muhammad's 7th century battle against the Jews of Khaybar to Hamas's present-day war with Israel. In one scene in the book, a young suicide bomber named Muhammad calls his mother for a final farewell to say her goodbye, leaving the line open so she can hear his martyrdom. And here I quote directly from the novel. He shouted, "Allahu Akbar, I'm heading to Khaybar," and threw his bombs one by one. Then he stormed the main hall firing. Muhammad fell and repeated, "I testify that there is no God but Allah, and I testify that Muhammad is his messenger." Then a wail escaped his mother's lips as she said, "Praise be to Allah who honored me with his martyrdom." So this religious framework of deep anti-Semitism and rhetoric that depicts the Jews as inherently untrustworthy is repeated also in the book, in the novel, which rejects the Oslo Accords on the basis that Jews are untrustworthy partners for peace. In one exchange, a Hamas supporter asks his Fatah counterpart, "Since when have the Jews honored agreements and treaties? This is what Allah has told us about them. History repeats itself, and Jews are the Jews." So what does the Arab world think and says on Sinwar's novel following October 7? So surprisingly, or perhaps not, it became a bestseller in 2024. Within a month, it topped sales at book fairs in Amman, Jordan, Idlib, Syria, Kuwait, Algeria. In Lebanon, Hamas distributed hundreds of copies of the novel to politicians, cultural figures, activists. I would say that Arab reactions split along two main ideological lines: Islamists and their rivals. So readers affiliated with the Islamist ideology of Hamas, which is, of course, Islamism is a political interpretation of Islam, which should not be confused with Islam as a religion. Islamists or readers that affiliated with Islamism, alongside media outlets linked to Qatar, Turkey, Hezbollah, glorified messages of jihad and martyrdom in Sinwar's novel and connected them to the events of October 7. A reading session organized by Qatar Al-Aqsa Committee in December 2024 hailed the novel characters for sacrificing their lives, property, and offspring for the sake of Al-Aqsa, asserting that Al-Aqsa is a matter of faith that is not confined to the borders of a homeland drawn by its enemies. An article published on the Qatari website Al-Arabi Al-Jadid argued that Sinwar's literary project is tightly intertwined with his resistance project, and that it was no coincidence he waited 2 decades to physically reenact the novel final scene. What is the novel final scene? The columnist of this article, and actually many other articles that were published in Arab press, pointed to the striking similarity between Sinwar's final moments and those of the narrator in the novel, who is also killed while fighting Israel. So here are his final words in the novel. Now time has come, O mother, I saw myself storming their positions, killing them like sheep, then becoming a martyr. I envisioned myself in the presence of the messenger of Allah in the gardens of paradise as he welcomed me, saying, welcome, welcome. Lebanese writer Ali Naim, who himself won the 2024 Qasem Soleimani Prize for Resistant Literature. Yes, there is such a thing in Lebanon. He wrote in Al-Mayadeen news portal affiliated with Hezbollah that Hamas leader's book sheds light on another dimension in the multifaceted personality of the great commander Yahya Sinwar, who was a writer and an intellectual, yet equally devoted to his people's cause to his very last breath. Another article on Arabi Post, which is an Islamist website based in Turkey, stated that the novel offers insight into how Hamas in Gaza has cultivated a young generation through years of education and preparation, instilling concept of sacrifice, which generated an inner drive toward resistance. On the other side, anti-Hamas reactions were unfortunately much less common. But it seems that the tides are gradually turning. There is a growing Arab backlash against Hamas, its leader, and even his novel. For several Palestinian and Arab writers, the novel reinforces the futility of Hamas's strategy of violent resistance and the disaster it brought upon the residents of Gaza Strip following October 7. For example, Hussam Khadra, who is a Palestinian journalist living in Cairo, dedicated a series of articles to the novel on a Palestinian website named Ahmad. This website is run from Egypt. The person who is running it is Hassan Usfour. He is a Gaza-born Palestinian politician. And Khadra noted in one of his articles that in the novel, Sinwar wrongly assumed that Israel would not dare to enter and destroy the dense refugee camps in the Gaza Strip, a miscalculation that came at a heavy price for the 2 million residents of Gaza. Moreover, Khadra accuses Sinwar of suffering from mental issues that ultimately took their toll on Gaza's civilians. And here is what he wrote in one of these articles. The novel offers a window into the mind of a person suffering from antisocial personality disorder. The symptoms of this disorder include hostility, violence, lack of empathy for others, no sense of guilt for harming others, and engaging in irresponsible or dangerous behavior without regard for personal or collective safety, all of which the people of Gaza witnessed with their own eyes throughout the war in the Gaza Strip. By the way, the cartoon, the caricature that you see on your right was drawn by a Saudi cartoonist. Similar harsh criticism came from an Egyptian columnist named Sami al-Buhairi in an article published on Ilaf, which is a liberal Saudi news portal. According to Buhairi, reading the novel revealed several insights about Hamas. Sinwar ignores in his book the relatively moderate leaders of the PA. They are not mentioned at all, while glorifying Hamas leaders and bombers who made great efforts to sabotage Arab-Israeli peace process and transform the Palestinian issue from a territorial conflict into a religious war between Judaism and Islam. Simultaneously, independent of Sinwar's book, criticism of Hamas has been, as I said, growing steadily across the Arab traditional and also social media throughout the war, and I will now show you a short clip featuring Jordanian journalist, his name is Hasham El-Amer, who strongly condemns Hamas, referring to the recent protest that Gaza witnessed a few weeks, or maybe about 1 month or two ago. So I will show you. Let's see that it works.
تخيل أن أهل غزة أنفسهم يخرجوا بمظاهرات بعشرات الآلاف يطالبوا بسقوط حماس ورحيلها، وبالمقابل شوف مكان بعيد عن غزة وتحديدا في الأردن يخرجوا بمظاهرات تطالب ببقاء حماس ويعلنون موالاة قادتها. يعني إذا كان أهل غزة الذين تسميهم حماس حاضنتها الشعبية ينقلبوا عليها ويطالبوا بسقوطها، كيف تخرج أنت في الأردن وتطالب ببقائها؟ لا بل وتقول وتدعي أن كل الأردن حمساوية. دعني أخبرك لماذا ليس كل غزة حمساوية. بدنا نعيش بحرية، بدنا نعيش بحرية، بدنا نعيش بحرية. يا للعار يا للعار يا للعار يا للعار يا اللي قاعد جوا الدار. حركة حماس التي تهتف لها هي بنظر أهل غزة حركة تسببت ليس بأكبر كارثة فقط في تاريخ غزة، بل في تاريخ فلسطين كلها. حركة أعلنت حرب لم تعد لها ولم تراعي فيها حال شعبها وقدرتهم على الصمود والمواجهة، أو حتى قدرتهم على تحمل حرب بهذا الحجم وطويلة الأجل.
نقول لمن يتاجر بمعاناتنا وبآلامنا، لمن يمارس العبث بدماء أطفالنا، لمن يريد وهو في فنادق تركيا وقطر، لمن يريد أن يجعلنا نتصدى لدبابات وطائرات الاحتلال بأظافر ولحوم أطفالنا، نقول لهم أنتم تبيعوا الوهم، نقول لهم ألا يكفيكم.
بنظر أهل غزة يا من تهتف في عمان، هذه الحرب تسببت بمقتل أبنائهم ونسائهم وأقربائهم وأصدقائهم. بنظرهم هذه الحرب تسببت بتدمير منازلهم وحاراتهم ومدنهم وأحلامهم ومستقبلهم. بنظرهم هذه الحرب جعلت مصير غزة لا بل فلسطين كلها على المحك، خاصة وأنهم يواجهون الآن شبح التهجير بعد أن تحولت غزة إلى مكان غير صالح للحياة.
والله الصراحة قبل 7 أكتوبر ما كناش بدنا نطلع، كانت حياتنا حلوة ومبسوطين، بس بعد 7 زفت اللي أجونا فيها أول واحد مدين إنه ما أنا بدي أطلع يعني.
والذي زاد الطين بلة بنظر أهل غزة هو إدارة حماس للمعركة وما بعد المعركة، أي المفاوضات، حيث فاوضت حركة حماس على مصالحها الشخصية وبقائها حتى لو كان ذلك على حساب وحياة ومصير أهالي غزة. فبنظر حماس أهل غزة وكما وصفهم قادة الحركة والناطقون باسمها هم مجرد أوراق ضغط وخسائر تكتيكية، ولحوم أطفالهم مجرد سلاح يقاتلون فيه. لذلك ولأجل هذا كله خرج أهل غزة بالمظاهرات التي شاهدناها يطالبون برحيل حماس وسقوطها. فكيف أنت الذي تعيش في الأردن تخرج وتطالب ببقائها؟
So this clip was, by the way, released before the dramatic decision by the Jordanian authorities last month to ban the Muslim Brotherhood after 80 years of legal activity in the kingdom. This move came in response to the group's collaboration with Hamas in operating terror cells on Jordanian soil, and it reflects a growing recognition in parts of the Arab world that Hamas has brought harm also to the Palestinians' cause, the Arab national interest, and broader regional stability. So, in my view, we spoke before about freedom of speech. Sinwar novels should also be banned worldwide. Regrettably, as we saw before, despite its violent contents, it has been translated into multiple languages, and it is still being sold in bookstores across North America, Europe, the Middle East, as we speak. So this novel is not just a fiction, it's a manual for violence, it's incitement for terror, and it's a danger not only to Israel, but also to, or maybe mostly to the Palestinians, to the region, and all who seek a different future, a future shaped not by bloodshed, but hopefully by peace. Thank you.
We will now continue with our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Aved Kananeh from Tel Aviv University. He will speak about Syria and Lebanon following Assad's fall.
Okay, good morning, Sabah al-Khair, Boker Tov. Thank you for having me here and for inviting me to give this talk. Distinguished ambassadors, esteemed guests, thank you for your presence today. And I am really delighted and honored to have this opportunity to share my thoughts and of the complex relationship between Lebanon, Syria, and also especially Hezbollah in Lebanon. Sorry, I don't have a very nice presentation like my colleague, so I will give my talk right away. The title of my talk is a little bit changed, and I am going to talk about Hezbollah, Lebanon, and regional dynamics post-Assad's regime. I'll be offering a brief analysis that deliberately focuses on perspectives often overlooked in conventional discourses. In the brief time that I have, I aim to illuminate selected aspects of the Hezbollah, Lebanon, Syria triangle that receive insufficient attention in mainstream analysis. Specifically, I will address 5 key issues. First, the contrasting economic and political models that have historically defined Lebanon and Syria. Second, the systematic marginalization of Shiite within Lebanon's power structure. And third, the theological evolution that enabled Hezbollah emergence. Fourth, the often forgotten historical bonds between Lebanese Shiites and Palestinians. And finally, the multidimensional regional implications of Assad's fall beyond the commonly discussed security concerns. So my talk will be especially focusing on history. I'm coming from the Department of Middle Eastern History. But I will touch on also the situation right now in the region. Rather than retracing the well-trodden paths centered on Israeli security concerns or Iranian strategic objectives, I will concentrate on these internal dynamics and historical relationships that have shaped this complex regional reality. By examining these economic models, sectarian power structures, and community relations that underpin current developments, I hope to provide fresh insights that complement and perhaps challenge prevailing narratives. Now, let me give a few words about the foundational contrast between Lebanon and Syria. Lebanon and Syria represent two contrasting models that have defined the Levant's modern history. Lebanon was intentionally constructed as a counterpoint to Syria, an outward-looking, Western-oriented entity built on a free market economic model. Its foundational concept was to serve as a cultural and economic bridge between the East and the West, linking Arab raw materials and oil with Western industry. This is the main idea of some of the Lebanese thinkers and philosophers like Charles Qurm or Michel Chiha, who are the fathers of the Lebanese nationalism. The Lebanese model emphasized free trade, minimal customs barriers, and an open economic system centered on banking services and trade. Its political system institutionalized sectarian power sharing dominated by Maronite Christians and Sunni Muslims. Syria, by contrast, evolved toward a quasi-socialist model with a more closed economy following the Ba'athist takeover. Under Assad regime, Syria emphasized state control of major industries, land reform, and economic self-sufficiency with periodic liberalization attempts that primarily benefited regime-connected elites. This fundamental divergence in economic and political models created distinct social structures and power distributions that continue to shape regional dynamics today, even after Assad's fall. Now I'll move to talk a little bit about this economic configuration and the marginalization of Shiites in Lebanon. The economic and political model that defined Lebanon directly benefited the sectarian elites, particularly Maronites, Christians, and Sunni Muslims, while systematically marginalizing the Shiite community, which remained largely peripheral to central power and wealth. Shiites were predominantly rural, concentrated in the agricultural south and Biqa' Valley, far from Beirut, which is the economic and political power center of Lebanon. The community suffered from chronic underinvestment in infrastructure, education, public services, and so on. So the Lebanese state's free market approach to development left Shiites regions with minimal government attention or resources. This marginalization created fertile ground for radical political movements. the influx of revolutionary ideologies, secular ideologies, from the broader region found receptive audiences among Shiite youth who saw little future in the existing Lebanese system. Now, Shiite religious figures responded by developing new interpretation of traditional concepts and synthesizing religious authenticity with revolutionary politics in order to attract back the Shiite youths from the secular movements. And by the way, this process have been done not only in Lebanon, but also in Iran, in Iraq, in Bahrain, and in other places that there is Shiites. Now, Hezbollah emerged as a product of these economic, social, intellectual, and political developments, representing what I have called a mutation in Shiite political thought, which is a transformation that mobilized traditionally passive communities for hundreds of years into revolutionary action. Let's now turn to examine more specifically how and why Hezbollah emerged as such a powerful force in Lebanese politics and society. Hezbollah emergence was not a historical accident, but the culmination of long-term socioeconomic and ideological developments catalyzed by specific historical events. The organization formed amid Lebanon's civil war in the early 1980s, with two critical factors: Israel's 1982 invasion of Lebanon and the arrival of Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps advisors in the Beqa Valley in Lebanon. The theological foundation of Hezbollah came from transformation of Shiite political thought by figures like Muhammad Hussein Fadlallah in Lebanon, Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr in Iraq, Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran, also Dr. Ali Shariati in Iran. These thinkers reinterpreted the traditional Shiite concepts to enable and encourage revolutionary actions. For example, the doctrine of intidar, which is one of the main doctrines and principles of the traditional Shiite thought, intidar, which means the waiting for the hidden Imam to reappear, was reconceptualized from passive waiting to active preparation. Shahada, martyrdom, was reimagined as revolutionary sacrifice rather than tragic fate. The Karbala paradigm was transformed from ritualistic commemoration into a model for confronting contemporary oppression. This theological framework created a powerful appeal by combining revolutionary action with religious authenticity, attracting marginalized Shiite youth who saw little future in Lebanon's sectarian system. While Hezbollah's theological foundation are crucial to understand the organization, we must also recognize another vital dimension of its identity and appeal: the historic relationship between Lebanese Shiites and Palestinians. This connection would provide us essential context for understanding Hezbollah's position on regional conflicts also post-October 7th. The relationship between Lebanese Shiites and Palestinians has deep historical roots that long predate current political configurations. Before 1948, Haifa, the city of Haifa, served as the primary urban center for Shiites from southern Lebanon, Jabal Amil. functioning as their economic and cultural hub. The city provided markets for agricultural products, educational opportunities, and urban connections that Beirut, dominated by other sects, did not offer to the Shiite community. The 1948 Nakba transformed these relationships. When Palestinians fled to Lebanon, it was primarily Shiite communities that welcomed these refugees, creating enduring bonds between the communities. Later, during the turmoil of the 1960s and 70s, these rules reversed in notable instances, and Palestinian refugee camps sheltered Shiite refugees during periods of conflict, creating reciprocal bonds of solidarity. Both communities experienced marginalization and at times became victims of the same massacre in the civil war in Lebanon, for example, in Sabra and Shatila in '82. This shared historical experience created deep connection that transcended later political complications. When Hezbollah emerged in the 80s, it built upon these historical ties, but reconfigured them within a new religious revolutionary framework that emphasized resistance against Israel as a religious and political imperative. The October 7th events and subsequent Gaza war have revitalized these historical connections, with Hezbollah positioning itself as honoring this long-standing solidarity through its military engagement along Israel's northern border. Now I will focus to move to the present moment and examine how the fall of the Assad's regime has fundamentally altered the strategic landscape and how this affects the different arenas, especially in Lebanon, but also especially in Hezbollah. The collapse of Assad regime has fundamentally altered the regional architecture with wide-ranging implications for multiple actors across the Middle East. I have 5. Okay. This transformation extends far beyond Syria borders, creating new geopolitical realities that are reshaping alliances and power dynamics. I would like to briefly draw attention to some of the complex ripple effects emanating from Syria's transformation effects that will continue to reverberate throughout the entire region in ways we are only beginning to understand. The strategic reconfiguration we are witnessing will undoubtedly reshape power balances and alliances for years to come. I will focus on just 3 key arenas as examples: the Israel-Palestine, Lebanon, and Turkey. Of course, we could also analyze the effects on Jordan, Egypt, Iran, and indeed the entire region and even international dynamics. But given our limited time, I will restrict my analysis to these 3 illustrative cases, and I will do it very quick. First, regarding Israel and Palestine dynamics, we are witnessing the formation of new Muslim Brotherhood axis stretching from Turkey through Syria to Gaza, supported by Qatar. This emerging axis directly competes with the traditional resistance axis of Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah, and certain Palestinian factions. Hamas now finds itself at a strategic crossroads. While its military wing recognizes that Hezbollah and Yemen's Ansarullah, the Houthis, stood with them during the recent Gaza war, its political leadership maintains strong ties to Qatar and Turkey. This internal division between Hamas' political and military wings means its ultimate alignment remains uncertain as these competing regional axes consolidate. Turkey confronts two distinct challenges from Assad's fall. The obvious dilemma concerns the Kurdish question and its impact on Turkey's domestic politics, including the possibility of territorial aspirations along its border. However, there is another critical dimension receiving insufficient attention, which is Turkey's Alevi population, approximately 20 million citizens who share religious traditions with Syria's Alawites. The massacre that occurred against Alawites in Syria's coastal regions have deeply alarmed this community in Turkey, creating potential for domestic sectarian tensions that could constrain Turkey's freedom of action in Syria. For Lebanon, and this is the final, the implications are profound on multiple levels. The revival of Sunni political Islam in Syria is already influencing Lebanon's Sunni communities, particularly in the north. We must consider the historical relationships between Tripoli and Syria, which are being reactivated as Lebanese communities look eastward toward what was once Greater Syria. Economically, if Syria stabilizes under a new configuration, it may develop its own economic openness and service economy, potentially diminishing Lebanon's unique regional economic position as the bridge between East and West. Lebanon's economic model, built on being the region's financial and commercial hub, faces an existential challenge if Syria emerges as an attractive alternative. For Hezbollah specifically, these regional shifts represent an existential strategic challenge. The organization has lost its critical territorial connection to Iran, faces new security threats along Lebanon's eastern border from potentially hostile Syrian factions, has become more vulnerable to Israeli strikes without Syrian strategic depth, and must navigate a fragmented resistance axis while balancing Palestinian solidarity with Lebanese self-preservation. However, this new situation has not completely eliminated Hezbollah's position. Despite the strikes it has suffered, it remains the dominant force within Lebanon, and any attempt to forcibly disarm it would ultimately lead to a new civil war if pressure continues. This is especially true since, despite the blows it has sustained, the party still enjoys strong support from the Shiite community in Lebanon, which is growing restless over the fact that various countries are preventing them from rebuilding their homes and neighborhoods despite the declared ceasefire. To conclude, what we are witnessing is nothing short of a regional realignment that will shape Middle Eastern politics for decades to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much again. And now our third and final speaker for this session is Dr. Galia Lindenstrauss from the Institute for National Security Studies. She will speak about Erdogan's Turkey as a regional actor.
Thank you. I'm also honored to be here today with this distinguished guests and in this important institute, which I think these are the fundamental things that are really... Thank you. these fundamental elements of society, of democracy, human rights, and justice, which I think are really the foundation of our society. But as mentioned, I will speak about Turkey, and I also had a little change of title. I will speak about Turkey between the regional and the global arenas, because I think Turkey as a regional actor is actually quite self-evident. I don't think Turkey has to prove itself as a regional actor. But I think Turkey is even more ambitious, and the regional is not enough for it. And in general, I think because of technological changes, because of the move to a multipolar international system, I think this dichotomy between regional and global is less apparent than before. I want to start with, it's a little small, but I want to start with a summary that President Donald Trump made after his recent talk with President Erdogan. And he mentioned that in their discussion, they talked about the war between Russia and Ukraine, all things Syria, that's his phrasing, and Gaza and more. So of course, when you talk about Russia, Ukraine, Syria, and Gaza, that means Turkey is something more substantial than just a regional player. And that's also because of geography, of course, because it's located between different regions. This is a slogan that Erdogan has been running with actually since 2013, that the world is bigger than five, that there's a need for a reform in the United Nations in general and in the Security Council in specifically. And as you diplomats here know, this is not easy to do a reform in the Security Council, to ask the Security Council permanent members to give up their veto rights or to extend veto rights also to other actors. That's quite an ambitious aim, and voiced from a president of a 85 million people country, but still not a global power yet. But he has been voicing this from 2013, pointing to this revisionist trend in his way of thinking. This has been an op-ed that was published after the fall of Assad. Again, a little small maybe, but I'll read it to you. The balance of the power is shifting in the Middle East, and it is Turkey's full moon on the rise. And of course, when he talks about Turkey's full moon, he's referring to the weakening of the Iranian crescent, okay? All these years we have been worrying about the Shiite axis, the Iranian crescent in the Middle East, but now we're talking about a Turkish full moon. That's the new game in town. And this new game in town, why the full moon? Because Turkey's presence is actually a circle, it's true. We have a military presence in northern Cyprus. Turkey has a base in Somalia. Turkey has a base in Qatar. It has also bases in northern Iraq. It has been very highly involved in the civil war in Libya. It's been involved in Sudan, in talks between Somalia and Egypt. It's been all around. And this circle is supposedly some new threat that we should acknowledge, or at least, again, point to Turkey as an ambitious actor, as an actor that the states in the Middle East still don't know what's the end game. What does it want at the end of the day? Turkey has been accompanying this military presence also with a very impressive, growing defense industry. While in the past, Turkey was dependent on importing weapons from the mainly Western powers, mainly very much based on US defense industries, today it has its own abilities to produce most of what it needs. And as we all know, Turkish UAVs, for example, have been very dominant in different arenas of conflicts in recent years, be it in the conflict surrounding Nagorno-Karabakh between Azerbaijan and the Armenians, or in Ukraine and Russia. We also saw Turkish UAVs in the hands of Ukraine. And here you see Turkey building its own jet, its own fifth generation jet. It should be ready to operate in 2028 and enter into the Turkish Air Force 2030. We'll see. We know this country has tried to produce a jet, and this was not the most successful operations. But this is a serious country that is planning to build its jet. Also, on the picture on the left, You see Turkish air carrier, Turkey's self-produced air carrier. It's still only a vertical air carrier, so it's now only fit for UAVs. It was planned, by the way, for F-35s, but Turkey was kicked out of the project of the F-35 because it bought S-400 from Russia. But they decided we're still going on with the project, and they made it for their UAVs. So the UAVs can fly from this air carrier. But this is not the only project Turkey is planning. It's also planning to produce its indigenous air carrier, a regular air carrier. Now, when you have an air carrier, you're not just a regional player, right? You want to go to other regions. So this is, again, I think something we should pay attention to. Now, this ability to produce weapons is, of course, very important for Turkey itself. It's not dependent on outside actors, or it's dependent only for parts of these machines, but not the machine as a whole. And Turkey has been had weapons embargo imposed on it because of Cyprus, because of the Kurdish issue. So this is something that was traumatic for the Turks, and that's part of the reason why they went to an indigenous defense industry. But this also gives Turkey power in the sense that it is exporting its defense industry, and this is giving it diplomatic power in the Middle East, but also beyond the Middle East, as you can see in the map of places in which Turkey is, for example, exporting drones. And Turkey is also in talks with Saudi Arabia, for example, to produce drones in a joint complex in Saudi Arabia. So this is really giving Turkey power in the international system it did not have before, this defense industry. And again, it's not perhaps the most advanced defense industry, but in terms of value for money, it gives a lot of actors what they need in the price they can pay, and with no strings attached. And that's a very good bargain in this international arena. I want to move to Syria, which is in direct continuation to the previous talk. Again, we know that Erdogan had made a bet long ago in the beginning of the civil war in Syria that he was opposed to Assad and he would support any one of the actors that were operating against Assad, from the most secular to the Islamists. He didn't check their credentials. Basically, Turkey supported logistically, militarily, and otherwise all the actors that were against Assad. For most of the Syrian civil war, it was a failed bet. It only produced terror. It only produced refugees to Turkey. It was something that was not seen very, very favorably in Turkish public opinion, but things happened the way they happened. And in December 2024, Assad falls, and Erdogan is seen correctly as the big winner of Syria. But again, we see the rhetoric with regard to Syria as not just simple, this is our neighboring country, we worry because of that there will be terror there, we want a stable neighbor. Erdogan's rhetoric is much more dramatic in a sense. Here he says, Turkey is bigger than Turkey. We can't limit ourselves with regard to Syria. In a sense, saying that we have an obligation towards Syria. It's beyond our control. We have to do it. And I think, again, this means of a very, very ambitious actor that is not easily restrained. Here you see a map that was in one of the Turkish TV channels of the possible Turkish bases that Turkey wants to establish in Syria. This is, I think, a very maximalistic map, but if you look here, we're talking about 7 bases that Turkey would want theoretically to establish in Syria. And some of them, as you see, very close to the Israeli border. So again, something that we Israeli decision makers cannot ignore. And we see that there is a growing perception that Turkey is a threatening country to Israel. This is something we less saw in the past. Actually, throughout the Syrian civil war, there was no real clash between Turkish interests and Israeli interests. Turkey was interested in the north, Israel was interested in the south. No big issue. But today, when Turkey basically has economic plans with regard to Syria, it has energy plans with regard to Syria, Turkey is interested that stability would be restored in all Syria, that President Ashar will have control on all Syria. That means Turkey is also a very much vested interest, a vested actor in southern Syria. And here you see a proposed map of energy pipeline from Qatar to Turkey through Syria, and from there, of course, to Europe. We also recently heard about Turkish plans to export gas to Syria. I don't know if it's Turkey's own discovered gas in the Black Sea, or it's gas that it's importing from other places. But again, this energy, economic plans, transportation plans, Syria has a big role of making Turkey an important hub in the transportation and energy and economic ties between the Gulf and even further east to Europe. This is where Turkey wants, and Syria is a vehicle for making this idea of Turkey, bring it into life. We talk a lot about Turkey and Syria, but we also should not forget the Eastern Mediterranean arena. Here above we see basically what, if you see the Turkish flag, that was basically what Turkey should have, the rights Turkey should have got according to the law of the sea. And yes, it gives a big advantage to Greece, because Greece has so many islands, and they are mostly populated islands, and populated islands deserve rights, sea rights and economic waters. But Turkey viewed this map and sees it as for it's something that it can't live with, and hence it developed what it calls the Blue Homeland Doctrine, the Mavi Vatan. And as you see, all the blue is what Turkey thinks that it is its rights to have in these areas. And what's more important is that for Turkey, these naval territories are not less important than its territory itself. And it thinks that it should protect these naval territories with all the might it protects its land territories. And this, of course, again, creates a lot of tension in the East Med, and things like it signed an EEZ agreement, an economic waters agreement with Libya, created a lot of problems. It was only one side of the Libyan civil war, so it's not considered legitimate, also because it ignores Crete. But also today, there are talks about a possible signing of an EEZ agreement between Turkey and Syria, which will ignore the rights of Cyprus and also create a lot of problems in the Eastern Mediterranean. So that's also an arena we should keep in mind. There was a question here about Turkish-Israeli relations, so I want to end with this aspect. This is a timeline of Turkish-Israeli relations from 2010 till now. It begins with the flotilla crisis, and basically shows that most of the time we were actually in crisis between the countries, and that when there were normalization periods between the countries, they lasted less than 2 years. We had a short period of normalization 2016-2018, and we had a short period of normalization 2022 to 2024. As this chart shows, we are definitely in the worst crisis we had in Turkish-Israeli relations. But it's one thing to have a crisis, to be rival states. It's another thing to be enemy states. And this is what we should try to avoid. And as mentioned by the previous speaker, there is a possibility of a clash in Syria, and I think that's a worrying element. But here comes in President Trump, and I started with Trump, I'll end with Trump. In a recent, in Netanyahu's recent visit to the White House and in the press conference, Trump basically says, I can fix things between you and Erdogan. Erdogan is my friend. And if there's a problem, I can fix it. But as long as you, Israel, are reasonable. Okay, it doesn't say both sides have to be reasonable. He says to Netanyahu, you have to be reasonable. And that means that Israel will have to understand for itself, and then later on communicate to Turkey and the US what are its red lines in Syria that it can't give up. Not that we can continue what we had in the past, that we had freedom of action in Syria during the civil war. That was good to have during the Syrian civil war, but this period has now ended. We need a new game new rules of the game. And hence, Israel has to be reasonable, and I think this is something we should bear in mind, that Trump basically is very empathetic to Turkish demands in Syria, and Israel has to make sure that what it presents as its demands in Syria are really things that it cannot live without, because if Israel will be too maximalist with regard to Syria, it will get nothing. I will stop here. Thank you.